In this lecture, we will be going over a new version of Frege's puzzle, which we haven't seen yet in this class, and in some ways is the most radical version of something that seems similar to Frege's original puzzle. So in this video, I will give you an overview of the lecture, and then we'll begin now with some review of the versions of Frege's puzzle which we have already seen in this class. So first, as an overview of this lecture, in the required reading, Saul provides a striking new puzzle that's similar to Frege's original puzzle, but it's more radical. According to her, simple sentences that differ only with regard to co-referring names may differ in truth value, and not just differ in cognitive value. So first, I will review the various versions of Frege's puzzle we've already seen, and then in the next video, I'll present Saul's puzzle and some discussions about what can be said about it. So again, hopefully what the rest of this video is very much a review, and I hope that most of this content is something that you all are already familiar with from the course. So the first thing is a collection of really the original puzzles that Frege pointed out, okay? So the first and very basic thing at the very beginning of his classic paper on sense and reference, which was the first paper we read for the class, Frege gives a puzzle in terms of identity statements, okay? So here it is. The ancient Greeks, including Plato, had the name Phosphorus for the morning star, and they had a different name, Hesperus, for the evening star. Now later, it was discovered that the star they saw in the morning and the star they saw at night, in the evening, was actually the same star, or it was Venus, the planet. Okay, so it was discovered that Hesperus is Phosphorus. So what that means is that the following two sentences differ in cognitive value. That is, the sentence Hesperus is Hesperus is something that everyone upon some reflection should be able to know. So for instance, the ancient Greeks knew that Hesperus is Hesperus. They knew that this thing was identical to itself. Okay, so 1A is kind of trivially true. Okay, and so because it's very easy to know that 1A is true, it has a different cognitive value than 1B, which represents the astronomical discovery. So 1B is a claim that Hesperus is Phosphorus. So that is what the ancient Greeks, for instance, believed 1A, that Hesperus is Hesperus, but they did not believe that Hesperus is Phosphorus. They hadn't made that discovery yet. So it seems that there's a difference in the kind of rational or cognitive value of these two sentences. Okay? And so this is a puzzle because these two names, Hesperus and Phosphorus, have the same referent. Okay? So again, in order to explain this contrast, Frege held that the meaning of names was not a referent, but a sense. And then we've seen in this course many different attempts on behalf of the view which claims that the meaning of a name just is a referent to try to explain what this different cognitive value is. Now, we're not going to be getting into theoretical treatments of these puzzles in this lecture. I'm just going to be right now reviewing the puzzles themselves, and then in the next video I'll be presenting Saul's puzzle and some responses to it. But so the second thing to note is that Frege's original puzzles don't just have to do with identity statements, or they don't just have to do with differing cognitive value of identity statements, but they also have to do with the different cognitive value of really any kind of sentence that involves switching out co-referring proper names. Okay, and identity statements where we trade Hesperus here and we put in Phosphorus for Hesperus to get this different identity statement, 1B, with a different cognitive value, okay? The fact that we're doing this switch with identity statements is just a specific instance of the idea that you can take a sentence containing a proper name and put in a co-referring proper name and get a different sentence with a different cognitive value. So here's an example where we have sentences that differ in cognitive value that are not identity sentences. Okay, so it is possible to be aware of someone named Cicero as who was a great Roman orator, and someone named Tully, who a great Roman statesman. And as it turns out, Cicero and Tully are the same person. Okay, but it's possible to know of Cicero and know of Tully without realizing that they are in fact the same person. Okay, so that means that it's possible for someone to believe that Cicero was murdered, okay, but not thereby kind of believe that Tully was murdered. So that is, this sentence 2A has a different cognitive value than the sentence 2B. Despite that, the only difference between these two sentences is that it's two different names that have the same referent. Okay, so we can think of starting with 2A, Cicero was murdered, and then we replace Cicero with the name Tully, and we get this other sentence 2B, and here we've swapped out co-referring names, but we get a difference in cognitive value. Okay. Because one can understand and accept 2A, but not understand. Sorry, one can understand both these sentences, but believe one, not the other. Okay, so again, someone can know who Cicero is and someone can know who Tully is, but not realize they're the same person. Okay. Now, the final puzzle that Frege pointed out was that when we don't consider identity statements or simple sentences where we just simply predicate some property, for example, being murdered to some object, okay, when we stop considering just simple sentences like that, if we start considering more complex sentences, like ones that involve verbs like to believe, okay, so Frege noted that when we start thinking about sentences that involve words like believe, okay, that swapping out co-referring terms can actually lead to a difference in truth value. Okay, so let's imagine, as in the comic book story, Lois Lane at this point doesn't realize that Clark Kent is Superman. Okay, so Clark Kent is this guy who wears a suit and tie, is a journalist, I think. Okay, and Superman is his kind of superhero alter ego. Okay, who wears a superhero costume with the S on the front, etc. Okay, and Lois Lane doesn't realize that they're the same person. So in this case, we can say that it's true that the following sentence is true. Lois Lane believes that Superman can fly. Okay. But when we swap out the name Superman here with the co-referring name Clark Kent, we get a sentence which is false. So it's false that Lois Lane believes that Clark Kent can fly. Okay, so this third version of Frege's puzzle, which he originally made, was he observed that when we start having more complex sentences where we have certain special verbs like believes, okay, that in these special complex sentences, switching out co-referring proper names doesn't just change cognitive value, but it also changes truth value. Okay, and just to foreshadow, what Saul's puzzle is that she's going to find certain cases of simple sentences, so sentences which do not involve special terms like believe, in which it seems that the truth value changes. Okay, but before getting to that, in the rest of this video, let me just quickly go over the different kinds of Frege's puzzle which we saw authors since Frege deal with. Okay, so the one that we spent a lot of time on was what we might call Frege's puzzle in thought. Okay, so here in these original puzzles, we're concerned with sentences and language. Okay, we're concerned with the different cognitive value of these sentences. Okay, but we can see that when we start thinking about beliefs and other mental states, but I'll focus on beliefs for simplicity, which is what many authors do as well, it sees that when we think about the nature of beliefs, we have exactly a very similar puzzles arise. Okay, so this is the puzzle, the version of the puzzle that Fodor talks about in the reading of his that we looked at. So there's an ancient Greek play in which this individual, Oedipus, was abandoned by his parents when he was a child or very, very young, like an infant, and he kind of grew up and then eventually was a kind of a king or powerful and conquered the city in which his parents lived and in which his parents were the rulers of that city. Okay, and because he didn't know his parents, he ends up marrying his mother, who was the queen of the city, and murdering his father, who was a king. But he doesn't realize that these people are in fact his parents until it's too late. Okay, so what the reason why this matters in generating a kind of Frege's puzzle is that we can say that Oedipus, and this is before he kind of finds out that he's kind of in a tragic situation, we can say that Oedipus has the belief that Jocasta would make a suitable wife. Okay, and Jocasta is the name of his mother and the queen, but he doesn't realize that. Okay. So, but we can say that Oedipus has the belief that Jocasta would make a suitable wife, and that is why he marries her. Now, Oedipus also has the belief that the king of the city should be killed, and that's why Oedipus does that. But as we said, Jocasta is his mother and the king is his father. So Jocasta is the same as his mother and the king is the same as his father. But that does not mean, just because he has the beliefs that Jocasta would be a suitable wife or that the king should be killed, this does not mean that Oedipus believes that his mother is a suitable wife or that Oedipus believes that his father should be killed. Okay, so it seems like it's a different belief that Jocasta would make a suitable wife than the belief that one's mother would make a suitable wife. Okay, so here we have these kind of two different ways of specifying beliefs where we're specifying the same individual, but it seems like they're different beliefs. Okay, and in order to explain how those are different beliefs, despite the fact that it's the same person, that's analogous to the puzzle here, except here we're looking at the cognitive value of sentences, whereas here we're thinking about the individuation or the nature of beliefs. Okay, here's another example of this, and this is an example which Heck dwells on for most of the paper, which is the required reading for the final class later this week. So let me just quickly just explain this example to you, and hopefully that will help make it clear when you're reading his paper. Okay, so in the second example, again, this is very, very similar to the first example. It's just a different kind of characters. So there's a man living in Hartford, Connecticut, and this man has an eccentric neighbor who he adores. Okay, so he's lived beside this neighbor for years, and this neighbor is quirky, eccentric, and the man really likes this neighbor. Okay. So the man knows the neighbor by his name, Samuel Clemens. Okay, so that's how this man knows his neighbor. But the man does not realize that the neighbor is actually the famous author Mark Twain. Okay, so this man has a neighbor who he admires and knows as Samuel Clemens, and this man does not realize that this neighbor is a famous author, Mark Twain. So one morning, the man reads in the paper that Mark Twain has died, but he thinks nothing of it. Okay, so again, the man's reading the paper, and the paper is reporting on this famous author dying, and the paper says that Mark Twain has died, but the man doesn't really care for Mark Twain, the author. Okay, so it doesn't matter to him. But later that day, while in the town, the shop owner tells the man that Samuel Clemens has died. and the man is sad. Okay, so in one case, earlier in the morning, the man formed the belief that Mark Twain has died, but that belief doesn't really affect his emotions. But then later that day, the shop owner, when the man is told that Samuel Clemens has died, it seems reasonable that the man has formed the belief that Samuel Clemens has died, and this belief has a very different effect on the man's attitude and behavior because it makes the man sad. Okay, so it seems that in order for these beliefs to have these different effects, the belief that Mark Twain has died is a different belief than the belief that Samuel Clemens has died. But Samuel Clemens and Mark Twain are the same person. So how is that possible? This is just the other example of Frege's puzzle. Okay, now third, here's another example which we looked at when looking at the Neo-Phrygians, Evans, especially Evans and Campbell. Okay, and this was also came up to a certain degree in the reading from last week by Dickey and Rattan. So when attending, so here's the example, when attending to an orange over a period of time, the successive beliefs that it is orange, has the color orange, and that it is round, okay, these two beliefs justify the inference to the belief that there is a round orange thing in front of you, okay? So when you're focusing your attention on something and you don't let it out of your view and you form various beliefs about it over the time that you're attending to it, you're able to collect those beliefs together as about the same thing. Okay, so you notice that the orange has a color orange, you notice that it's round, and then so you're able to infer immediately that there's this single round orange thing. Okay, but imagine a case where you're not focusing on the orange over the period of time in which you form those beliefs. So imagine that one morning you come downstairs and you see on your kitchen table an orange, and you form the belief that it has the color orange. Now the next day you come downstairs and you see an orange again, and you form the belief that it's round. Okay, now in this case, especially if, for example, you live with roommates or family, there's a possibility that over the course of that past day, between the times you saw the orange, that actually maybe someone took the first orange and replaced it with another one. Okay, so if you haven't been keeping focus on something, you can't simply infer that there's one thing that has both the things you notice about it at different times if you're not keeping focus on it. Okay, so it seems that in one case, when you're tending to something over time, the successive beliefs justify a certain inference. Whereas in another type of case, very similar beliefs that have the same referent, okay, as about this orange, they do not justify a certain inference, okay? So given that these two sets of beliefs in these cases are about the same thing, how is it that one set can justify a certain inference and the other set not? Okay, so that's the similar kind of Frege puzzle that Evans and Campbell are really kind of setting out to try to solve. Okay, one thing to note quickly is that many authors, including some that we read in this class, mix together this puzzle about the nature of mental states or thought or belief. Okay, so many authors mix together these puzzles with the original puzzles about the cognitive value or truth value of various sentences. Okay, so for instance, in Fodor's discussion, what Fodor was just directly concerned with was how it could be that the sentence, Oedipus believes that Jocasta makes a suitable wife, and the sentence, Oedipus believes that his mother makes a suitable wife. So the way that Fodor understands the problem is to see how it can be that two different statements involving belief and Oedipus can differ in truth value. However, so that the question about how these two different belief reports can differ in truth value is a different question than what is the nature of beliefs. Okay, and even though Fodor talks about belief sentences, it's most natural that what he's concerned with is the nature of belief itself. Okay, so many authors, including Fodor, kind of mix together the question of the truth value of belief reports and the nature of belief itself. Okay, and we also saw, I think, especially with one of Campbell's papers, when he's talking about trading on identity, it's most natural to understand what he's saying is about when certain beliefs justify certain inferences or not. However, the way he talks about the puzzle is in terms of certain sentences and certain terms in certain sentences sharing a sense or not. Okay, so one thing to keep in mind, and potentially for your final paper, is just to be really clear about which of these kind of versions of the puzzle is the right one to be engaging with when you're engaging with the author. Okay. Again, Perry as well seems to flip between thinking about the nature of belief and thought and the meaning of sentences. Okay. Now, the final type of Frege puzzle which we've seen is Frege's puzzle in communication. Now, I have an example here. However, I'm not going to go over this example because this hopefully should be fresh in your mind from last week.